Getting your offer accepted versus losing against another offer could be the difference in just a small few things in how you write that offer. So how do you get your offer accepted in a competitive environment? How do you win? Well, that's exactly what we're going to discuss in today's video. We're going to talk about how to make your offer stand out against other offers and ultimately win the house you love. And a lot of it really comes down to controlling what you can control in how you write the offer. So in today's video, we're going to dive deeper into the things that you can change in the offer to help your offer stand out when there are multiple offers on the table. Over the last few years, we've been in a very competitive buyer's market where there's very few listings available, and oftentimes there's not only one offer or two offers, but there might be 3, 4, 5, 10 offers on the table for the seller to choose from. So what can you do differently versus the other offers in order to have your offer stand out and essentially rise to the top? Well, one of the very first things I want to tell you to do before you dive into the process of writing the offer is try to find out what's important to the seller. Maybe you're going to the open house and you just happen to catch the seller there, or the agent is there. Well, one of the things that you can do during that process is ask the agent what's important to the seller. What are they trying to accomplish? Where are they moving to? What time frame are they trying to move in? How quickly do they need to make a decision? While none of these may reveal some profound answer, they could give you some insight as to what the seller's thinking, and in turn could help you in writing your offer. Now, maybe you didn't have an opportunity to meet the seller and or really talk to the agent because there was a lot of people there. Well, that's something that your agent should be doing in addition to you doing it anyway, to see if there's anything that the seller is specifically looking for in the offer. That way you can cater your offer around what it is they're looking for. Now, in many cases, the seller just wants the highest price. Now, in that case, it can be difficult to cater the offer just to the highest price, but there are some things you can do to stand out, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. But with that, the listing agent could reveal some things that maybe the seller has told them that could help you in writing your offer to stand out. Maybe they're already in escrow on another property and they need to sell this property in order to move forward with that property. Or maybe the seller needs a longer term escrow because the home that they're building, that they're moving into, isn't quite ready yet. And so not only do they need a longer term escrow, maybe they would like a rent back for 30 or 60 days. Or maybe in other cases, they mentioned that the seller has to act quickly on another transaction. Therefore, they need to shore up this deal as quickly as possible. Therefore, they need to get through the contingency period as quickly as possible so that the seller can determine whether or not they're moving forward with their other deal. So there's a lot of different conversations that can take place. But if you're not willing to go out and have that conversation, and or your agent is not willing to call the other agent to try to get some additional information, then you could be setting yourself up for failure when trying to win that house. As a real estate agent for over 20 years, I can't tell you how many poorly written offers I see every single time I list a house. And many, many times, not only am I receiving poorly written offers, but I'm also receiving offers from agents that I never even had a conversation with. I don't know anything about their client or about the offer that they're sending me. In many cases, this isn't really that important, but people always want to do business with people they know, like, and trust. Now, maybe you don't know them, but the fact that they called you, gave you a little explanation of who their buyer is, what they're trying to accomplish, and they asked about your client leads me to believe that they're a professional agent versus somebody that just does this part-time and isn't really serious about the business. Because as somebody that's done this for a very long time, you want to work with professionals that do this every day. Buying a home can be a complicated process. So you want to make sure that the person on the other side is also a professional. Otherwise, you end up doing their job too. So before you start the process of writing the offer, just see if there's things that you can figure out about the seller. Now, in some cases, you're not able to obtain any information. Maybe the listing agent's just not willing to divulge anything, and or the seller hasn't really said anything. Therefore, the listing agent doesn't really know, but you at least have to try. That way you're not leaving something on the table. But now that we know what is important to the seller, it really comes down to controlling the controllables. What can you control? Well, you can only control how you write your offer and ultimately how it's presented to the listing agent and the seller on the other side, which is exactly what we're going to dive into right after you hit that thumbs up if you find any value in the content that I do here. And do me a favor and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on everything Orange County and real estate related. Now, when it comes to writing an offer, there's really only 7 to 8 variables that you can control in the contract in order to help your offer stand out. And the very first one is price. Now, it's really hard to discuss price on a video like this because we don't have a property in mind and what price should you offer. So that's a difficult one to understand. But we're assuming when you're writing the offer that you're writing it at a competitive price. Understand, we're still in a seller's market here in Orange County, which means homes that are priced correctly are still selling very quickly and typically with multiple offers. So if a home's only been on the market for a short period of time, you went to the open house, it's really busy, the agent on the other side is telling you that they have multiple offers, chances are you're going to have to make an offer at least at the asking price, assuming it's priced correctly, maybe even higher in order to get your offer accepted. Now, in some cases, price isn't the most important thing to the seller, but in my experience, it's really close to the top if it isn't. So a lot of what we're going to talk about in today's video isn't really going to matter unless you're able to start with a competitive price on that home. Now, in the case that the home has been sitting on the market for an extended period of time, they've had to reduce the price a few times. In that instance, maybe you can come in with a lower offer. But for purposes of this video, we're going to put price aside and just assume that you're coming in with a competitive price, so that the other things that we're going to talk about here can be the differentiating factor. And the very first one we're going to talk about is the escrow term. What is escrow term? It is how long you plan on being in escrow in order to purchase this home. Now, traditionally speaking, this is about 30 days from start to finish. So that means from the time your offer gets accepted, you're typically closing in around 30 days. So how do you stand out with the escrow term? Well, one of the things we talked about earlier is talking to the seller's agent, to the listing agent, to figure out what's important to the seller. A lot of times there will be some hints in that conversation as to their motivation, how quickly they're looking to move. If they have another property that they're looking to move quickly on, then maybe a shorter term escrow allows you to be a little bit more competitive and help your offer stand out. Or maybe in the instance that they're building that other property and they need some additional time, they're not looking to close quickly, you can potentially do a longer term escrow and or give them the opportunity to rent back in the contract. Now, I realize as a buyer, there's a lot of things that you have to shore up on your side, especially if you're renting another home. You have to tell your landlord, there's other things that you have to do. So the escrow term is super important to you as well. So just make sure you're erring on the side of caution if it's affecting your ability to actually perform in the contract. But what I would say in competitive markets, when you're trying to move very quickly, shortening an escrow period down to 21, 23, 24 days, somewhere in there, really helps your offer stand out versus the buyer that's coming in with a 30-day escrow. You might say, well, it's only a week. What does it really matter? Well, here's the deal. You come in as competitive as you can come in. And if the seller needs a little bit more time, let them negotiate you higher versus being the buyer that comes in with a 60-day escrow and isn't even getting a counter because they're not competitive to start with. Now, one of the very next things that you can control in the offer and how you write that offer is the earnest money deposit, your escrow deposit. This is the money that you put into escrow, assuming that your offer gets accepted. It's a good faith deposit, just shows the seller that you're serious in moving forward. And in my experience in competitive markets, you really want to max out this escrow deposit. And what do I mean by that? Well, in the state of California, based on the way the contract's written, it can't take more than 3% of the purchase price if you decide to back out of the contract for any reason after you release those contingencies. So in order to be competitive, what you do is you max out that amount right from the get-go. It shows the seller that, hey, I've got a serious buyer here. They're willing to come in with 3% of the purchase price to show me that they're ready to move forward. And the reason this is important is because it tells the seller that if this buyer decides not to move forward after they release contingencies, that I've got them on the hook for something. I didn't completely waste my time. And a seller wants to max out that number if at all possible, because if you just write $1,000 down and you drag out the process for 30 days and don't close, and the seller's only compensated $1,000 for the time they wasted by being under contract with you, not being able to accept other offers, that sort of thing, it's not really worth the money. But in the case that you're buying $1 million home and you put $30,000 into escrow as the earnest money deposit, and you decide to back out at the last minute, you get cold feet after you've released contingencies, well, in that case, $30,000 is probably, in many cases, worth the time that they wasted by having you under contract. But at the end of the day, the seller is just trying to confirm that they have a solid buyer on the other side. But here's the deal. You can offer any amount you want as a buyer to the seller for the earnest money deposit. But what I would say, it's in your best interest to max out that number if at all possible. At the end of the day, it just comes out of the money that you have to bring in at closing. It goes towards your down payment. It goes towards your closing costs. So this isn't money that you have to come in with in addition to those amounts. It comes out of that. And if at any point you decide to back out of the contract, as long as you have contingencies in place, you shouldn't have any issues getting all of that earnest money back. So that money is never really at risk until you release your contingencies on that property. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is down payment. Now, depending on who you are as a buyer, you may only have one option when it comes to down payment. Maybe you're buying a home using an FHA loan and you're putting the minimal down, which is 3.5%, and you don't have the ability to come in with 5%. Well, then you just have to do the best you can do. You don't have any control over that situation. But what I will say is oftentimes sellers look at the down payment in deciding which offer they should accept. But what I will say is, as a listing agent, I try to help the seller understand that the down payment isn't really that important as long as the buyer has a solid pre-approval. And that's part of the conversation I'm going to have with that buyer's mortgage lender when discussing that buyer, is how solid they are. But the reality is, no matter how hard I try sometimes, sellers believe what they believe. And many times they believe a buyer with a larger down payment is a stronger buyer. And that's not necessarily true. So with that, if you have the ability to put some more money down in writing your offer, it could end up helping you at the end of the day. But either way, what I will say is having your lender call the listing agent on the other side to discuss your financial position, to discuss your pre-approval and tell them where you are, could be the difference in your offer getting accepted versus not. So if you don't have a large down payment, or if you do have a large down payment, just make sure your mortgage lender is contacting the other side to let them know how solid you are as a buyer. Because what I can say as a listing agent, that helps me in differentiating between offers. If I've got two offers that are really similar and one mortgage lender calls me to explain their borrower versus the other one not doing anything, that gives me an idea that this one's probably going to communicate better. This is probably going to be a better experience. And many times it helps in making that decision which offer to go with. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is probably one of the more important things that you can alter in a contract in order to help your offer stand out and ultimately win the house, if you will. And that is contingency timeframes. So depending on where you're located, the contingency timeframes in the contract are set to predetermined numbers that can be altered. Typically, as a buyer, you can change these contingency timeframes and lessen them if you are able to complete these contingencies in a shorter amount of time. Or maybe in some cases you need to ask more time. But here in the state of California, it's written as 17 days to release your contingencies. Now, if you're watching this going, Jeb, what are contingencies? Contingencies are essentially back-out clauses in the contract, if you will. They're things like getting an appraisal completed, doing a home inspection, getting your loan approved, reviewing the seller disclosures, reviewing the title report on the property, and in some cases, reviewing the HOA docs if the home's located in a homeowners association. So what this number does is it gives you so much time to be able to do all of this information so that you can verify the property is what you think it is in order to release those and essentially move forward with the contract. Because in the case that your loan falls apart when you're trying to go through the loan approval, or the appraisal doesn't come in at value, or there's something majorly wrong with the house, you can use that contingency to back out. But how you can benefit in contingencies is by shortening them, because the shorter you make those contingencies, that typically means that's the faster you're going to have to release that earnest money deposit to the seller that we talked about earlier. And what this does is it more or less solidifies the contract from the seller's perspective. So once I have a buyer that's released all the contingencies on a property, we're pretty certain at that point that that buyer is moving forward, unless something crazy happens during the process, which in 20 years of doing this has only really happened a few times. So more specifically, what I'm talking about here is, instead of having 17 days to get your loan approved, maybe you shorten that number down to 10 days. And with regards to your home inspection, instead of having 17 days, maybe you shorten this number down to 5 days. or 7 days. Same thing with the appraisal and the other contingencies in the contract. The shorter you make them, the quicker it means you have to release those contingencies on that property. And in turn, the quicker it really confirms the deal from the seller's perspective. So if you have a seller that really needs to solidify a deal so that they can do something on the other side, the more aggressive you can make those contingency timeframes, in many cases, the more competitive your offer is going to get. Now, over the last couple of years, you've heard stories about people waiving all their contingencies, not having any contingencies at all, essentially putting their earnest money deposit at risk from day one. I do not recommend that. That is for a very specific buyer, someone that is super aggressive, someone that really understands the risk and is okay with that risk. For most buyers, that's not you. But I do believe in some cases it's okay to waive a loan contingency or waive an appraisal contingency as long as you have some other contingencies in place. I would never waive the home inspection contingency unless you truly knew that property. You knew the ins and outs of it. You need to keep something in place in order to give you an opportunity to back out if the opportunity presents itself. Now, there are some other things that you can do as a buyer in order to help your offer stand out, like changing things that you request from the seller, credits, even buyer commissions, which this one's going to be a really, really big one in 2024. But here's the deal. I'm not going to go over them in today's video because I am an agent and a lot of agents watch my videos, and I do need to keep some arsenal with me, right? I do need to keep some bullets to myself here for buyers that I'm representing in writing offers. So I'm not going to go over these additional things that you can do, but there are 3-4 other things that you can do as a buyer to help your offer stand out that will really make the difference. And if you're here in Orange County and you're looking for a buyer's agent to help you through this process, I would love the opportunity to be that person. So do me a favor and use the contact information below in the description to reach out to me directly. But hopefully you got some value in the other things that I mentioned. But if you're looking to buy a house here in Orange County and you're wondering about what other things that you need to consider outside of the offer, do me a favor and check out this video here.